Before I start the introduction, I want to remind you all about the Tearing Down the Wall Student Religion panel on Saturday morning, November 7th, 10:30 to 11:30 in DPS. The purpose of the panel is to become informed about various religious beliefs and practices and affirm mutual respect for respective religions. Mr. Kelly sent everyone a sign-up form last Wednesday for in-person or online attendance. I encourage you to come in person because we still have seating. Claude Gatebuke was a Rwandan genocide survivor, a Rwandan Civil War survivor, and human rights advocate. He's the executive director and co-founder of the African Great Lakes Network, an organization focused on justice, peace, prosperity in the Great Lakes region of Africa. His work focuses on genocide and mass atrocities prevention and includes lobbying on Capitol Hill in D.C. and across the U.S. Mr. Gatebuke is a well-sought-after speaker nationwide and across the globe at colleges, universities, churches, community organizations, and conferences. He has been featured in various magazines and newspapers across the globe. Claude has appeared on local and national and international radio and television programs. He has also been a guest at the White House for a briefing of leaders in the community. Let's welcome Mr. Gatebuke to the podium.
All right, thank you, Eman. Just want to start out with thank you, Mr. Joya, for having me here, Mr. Lawrence, for the opportunity to speak to your classes, and especially Eman and Tearing Down the Walls Club for having me speak to you guys. It's an honor to speak to you all. So I like to start out with my story and then get to the purpose of why I was invited to speak to you guys. I was 14 years old when a genocide broke out in Rwanda. Anybody seen the movie Hotel Rwanda by any chance? Some of you have seen it? All right. And so that film is just one building that is represented about the genocide in Rwanda. I was in Rwanda. All of that chaos was widespread and all over the country. As a 14-year-old, when the genocide started, it was actually, it started with the shooting down of the president's plane, the Rwandan president's plane at the time. Rwanda was in the middle of a war. It was a very polarized country along ethnicity. There was rivalry between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Those are the two major ethnic groups in Rwanda. It's really hard to tell who is who and what ethnicity a person belongs to in Rwanda because we're all black. Everybody's black in Rwanda. Here in the U.S., if you want to, figure out what a person is, you just look at them. They're black, they're white, they're Asian, they're Indian, Hispanic, and so on. When the genocide started, and when my mom came to us, my father wasn't home at the time, and told us that the president's plane had been shot, knowing all the violence that led up to the genocide, knowing we were in the middle of a war, knowing that there was all of these ethnic tensions, my first reaction was, oh man, I hope the president didn't die, because if he died, we wouldn't be able to finish the soccer tournament. That was my worry. And then my sisters look at me and they go, oh, Claude, you're so stupid. This is really dangerous. And starting that night, we started to hear like a tropical storm of bombs and bullets from everywhere. Things were crumbling, and I felt like just the world was caving in on me, around me, and I didn't think anything was left in the area. We went out the next morning, and the neighborhood looked untouched, but there was still shelling. I mean, we were hearing explosions on one side, and it would whistle over our heads, making the sound going like, and then boom on the other side. And so when you heard the sound, you knew they had missed you, but we were always afraid that we might get hit. And we came really close a few times, and then we ended up fleeing from the city of Kigali, which is where I grew up, and that city is the capital of Rwanda. During our flight from the city, we were on a little pickup truck, and there were literally dozens of people on this little pickup truck. It was packed with people. And at one point, the militias who were carrying out the genocide, they were killing people with hand weapons, machetes, and clubs. They selected me and my mother and decided they would kill me. When they took us away from the road. My sister stayed on the truck and other people, and they went to this little carpentry shed. When we got there, a bunch of strangers. I had never been to this place. It was middle of nowhere for me. A bunch of people rushed in, mostly women, some children, some older men, and they started yelling at these guys that were getting ready to kill us and saying, "Hey, don't kill them, leave them alone." They were afraid. They kept a distance because they were not only armed with machetes and clubs, but they also had guns. But how did they actually identify people? This goes to the history of colonialism in Rwanda. Rwanda was colonized by the Belgians. We had ethnicity in Rwanda, but it was not formal. There was mobility within those ethnic groups. Like I said, with black people, all of us pretty much being of similar, we speak the same language, live in the same neighborhoods. There was no way to really differentiate people, but they issued identity cards, and the identity card had your ethnicity in it. So the legacy of colonialism played a part in the genocide of Rwanda because they would look at your ID and determine what ethnicity you belong to, and that's how they decided to kill people. Sometimes they just arbitrarily killed people because I didn't have an ID. I was too young to have one. And they still selected me to be killed. When the crowd came rushing and started yelling at these guys, they said, "Oh, you know what? Go talk to that crowd over there, get some shovels and some hoes, dig your own grave, because we need to bury you after we kill you." So after being ordered to dig our own graves, there were two guys that came back with the driver who was driving the pickup truck. The driver didn't give up. He went and found some people in the area. These two guys came and negotiated for us. And they kept negotiating and negotiating. It was middle of the afternoon. And it was dark when eventually one of the negotiators said, "This boy and his mom," and think about it, you guys, most of you're around the same age, I think, around, close enough to 14. The guy says, "This boy and his mom are not going to make it 5 miles from here. Why don't you let somebody else kill them?" And somehow they agreed to it, and they let us go. We ended up surviving the genocide, fleeing into the Congo. We crossed multiple countries, from Congo to Uganda to Kenya. My father was actually here in Nashville when that genocide happened, and he was stuck here in Nashville. He was going to Meharry Medical College. Anybody know the school? It's a school. It's a local medical school here in Nashville, in North Nashville. And so he filed for asylum, and a year later we came to the U.S. And when I came to the U.S., I had this idea of America that it was Hollywood. Because, the biggest export from the U.S. is movies, right? And my reality was not exactly, what real life is when I got here. I had a lot of culture shock, but I still thought, this is paradise. Then I started noticing when we came, we lived in North Nashville, which was the ghetto. It's gentrified now, so a lot of it's not the ghetto anymore. But I went to school at Hillsborough because I didn't speak any English, and they had the ESL program, English as a Second Language, and I went there, and I saw the difference. I was like, there's something that doesn't add up here. I had seen destruction by armed people, and I kept seeing North Nashville looking like it's under surveillance with police just riding around all day, but I didn't see that in Green Hills. And I kept wondering, what is the difference? I eventually understood. Green Hills is a very wealthy neighborhood in Nashville, very affluent, and North Nashville is the ghetto, and it's, black and white. Basically, that was the difference in terms of the population that occupied these areas. And then I started experiencing it myself. When I was in high school, I played soccer. I also played football, and we had it playing MBA, by the way, in both sports, because MBA they always kicked our butts. But I went to school just down the street, Hillsborough. We had a soccer game where we were traveling, and the fans were so racist and coming at me with racist chants and screams and whistles. It got so bad, I ended up getting driven out of that town by the sheriff. This wasn't the only incident. Not many years ago, I have a cousin who's a really good soccer player. Same thing happened to him. He was in middle school, so this was probably about 2011. We went to a tournament in Tuscaloosa. I remember that. And one of the parents for the opponent team was screaming all of these racial slurs, and the fans were so mean to him. He still was really good in the game, that the parents of his teammates were afraid for us, and they ended up driving us from the field because they were afraid that if we drove by ourselves, we might get attacked. Another thing that I experienced was police brutality, multiple occasions, but the worst one was in 2015. So some of you were in middle school, some of you were in elementary school, but I got pulled over for not having my lights on. And I looked to my left, and there was somebody with a gun. And I looked at my right, and there was another cop with a gun. In the back, there was another cop with a gun. I got pulled out of my car, and they proceeded to search the car. The guy held me at gunpoint on his car with my hands on the hood, and he had his foot hooked on my right foot, and they searched my wallet. They went through the car. The car was empty. It had just a backpack and a wallet. But it really scared me. It shook me. And I have no record. I've never committed a crime or anything. I was very compliant. But I was so afraid because not long before, one of my best friends, Joe, had actually been yanked out of his car. They broke his window. They beat him down with a baton and took him to jail. I was afraid that the same thing might happen or they might pull the trigger. And having been in situations where I've had guns pulled on me, where I've been in a war, it just gave me flashbacks. And it just, it scared me. And to think back at people like Tamir Rice, who was shot in the park without even having the opportunity to comply, it really scared me. Those were things that I was just like, the U.S. is not Rwanda. I'm not suggesting that a genocide like what happened in Rwanda could happen, but when there's discrimination, when there is, and I'm pretty sure, I'm very convinced that the reason this happened was because there was no other reason. It was because I was black. And I was actually so afraid. When I left that place, I was in a rental car. I took it right to the airport because I suspected that they may have planted drugs in my car. It might come back and arrest me. And so for me, discrimination, inequalities, and racism, and just mistreating people on the basis of who they are leads to resentment, it leads to hate, and it leads to violence, and we can do something about it. And for me, the inspiration to actually speak and share my story came from Frederick Douglass. Anybody heard of him? So you guys heard the story. But his story really inspired me to speak because I knew there's power in speaking. I also have come to learn that silence is violence. There's also a quote that I like from Edmund Burke that says, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And so why am I sharing all of this with you? It's because you guys are powerful. You guys have a voice. You can use your voice to actually help bring the equality, to end these issues. These aren't politics. These aren't political issues. These are human rights. These are things that, does anybody like being singled out and mistreated for any reason? Even by your friends or anybody? So for me, this isn't a political issue. This is a human issue. And I would just like to encourage everybody to speak up. Use your voice. There are many things that happen in daily lives. You hear racist jokes. Speak up. You see things that are wrong, that if they happen to you, you wouldn't like it. Think about it critically and address it. And here on the campus, on the MBA campus, you actually have tearing down the walls. I encourage everybody to have a conversation, hard conversations. Get with tearing down TDW, and conversations will not be comfortable, but you can't grow in comfort. Unless you step out of your own comfort zone, you're not going to be able to grow. And TDW is going to provide that opportunity, and I just wanted to share with you how powerful you are and encourage you to use your voices, and TDW can help with actually some real concrete actions. Thank you so much for your time.